Good night. Welcome to Conversation with Rickford Burke. Of course, I'm Rickford Burke here in New York. Hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. Let me know. Text me. Let me know how you're doing. Text me. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me see your country flag. Good evening if you're in New York. Sorry, good night if you're in New York. Good night if you're in Guyana. Good evening. Good evening if you're on the West Coast of the United States, California, Washington, Oregon, etc. If you're in Canada, good night. If you are in London and Africa and Asia, good morning to you. Wherever you're watching from, I hope you're having a good time. Share the link, get into all your Guyanese groups. Share the link before you do that. Go to my YouTube page, click on subscribe, click on follow and like on both of my Facebook pages. Let's get the word out. Let's spread the word. Share this link to everyone, whether it's in Twitter, IG, on email, Instagram, WhatsApp, your Facebook Messenger group on Facebook. Text it to your friends, call up your friends, let them know Conversation with Rickford Burke is on. We're up straight to, wow, already 2,500. Let's get to 10,000 tonight. Keep sharing the link, everybody. I'll be back in 60 seconds. All right, keep sharing the link again. This is Rickford Burke here in New York. Welcome to Conversation with Rickford Burke. So tonight we want to deal with the police and the GDF in Guyana. I have many friends, and in those institutions, I respect the individual members of the institution. I respect the GDF. I have absolutely no respect for the Guyana Police Force's leadership. Absolutely none. They don't deserve any of our respect. I make no apologies for that. I do respect the GDF. I think they're professional people. GDF has some bright officers, and I think the GDF is a professional force, but I think it's being misused. But before I get to the GDF, I want to get to the Guyana Police Force, and I want to get to why I'm doing this program tonight, because the Guyana Police Force is being used as a tool of oppression in Guyana. We have the Guyana Police Force enforcing ethnic supremacy in the country. We have the Guyana Police Force trying to suppress dissent in the country, not trying to, being used by the government to suppress dissent in the country. Keep sharing the link, everybody. This is going to be a very interesting program. My guest tonight is going to be a former Lieutenant Colonel of the Guyana Defense Force, and we'll do an analysis of what happens in despotic states like Guyana when the police turns against the people. And so I want to continue my discussion with you with regard to the Guyana Police Force. Keep sharing the link, everybody. So since this PP came into power, a very professional, I think the Granger administration did a good job in trying to professionalize and resource the Guyana Police Force, equip the force with the necessary resources, necessary training, for the force to emerge as a professional force. From the time the PPP got into power, it went downhill. It is the design of the PPP not to have the Guyana police force function. We saw this with over the last 23 years. Over the 23 years when they were in power, they picked the worst person to be commissioner. They picked yes people, people who can be puppets, people who are there to protect them and their followers rather than to execute the mission of the Guyana police force, from Larry Lewis to Henry Green to Floyd McDonald, all, all just a pack of jokers who are unprofessional officers who follow political directions rather than the law and do political favors for the PPP as puppets rather than protect and serve. And so they came back into power with the exact same strategy to diminish the force, use the force as a tool of oppression against the African Guyanese population or anybody who doesn't support the government. And we saw what they did in over the last 23 years, as I said. The Guyana police force is the only police force outside of Jamaica, that has so much confrontation with the public in the Caribbean. The Guyana police force. Jamaica has a genuine crime problem. Guyana has a genuine crime problem, but the police resource is not focused on crime. The police resource in Guyana is focused on quelling dissent, oppressing dissent, shutting down dissent, because the government rules by, or attempts to rule the country by, an iron fist. Guyana is not a democracy. Guyana is a despotic state. And yes, we have oil, we have this vast natural patrimony, we have vast oil wealth now, and it will be squandered. And to the extent that people will dissent and protest against the government and speak out, the Guyana police force is being cultivated to put down that dissent. That's all. That's all. That's the mission of the Guyana police force under the PPP government, to help the government subjugate, help the government control, help the government rule the opposition population in the country. Now, when I get to, I'm going to talk with retired Lieutenant Colonel Leon Saul from the GDF. But before that, I want to examine what took place with the Guyana police force in relation to the population once the PPP came to power. One, the government used the police force as a means of revenge to get to all of the people at the Elections Commission, all of the African Guyanese leadership of the Elections Commission. Let's call a spade a spade. So right away, the police went and arrested all of the Black people in high office at GCOM and charged them, fabricated charges. Not one. I'm for the rule of law. If somebody breaks the law, then let them face the consequences. I am not for kangaroo courts and making up charges and framing people. The people who do that should face the law. And that's what's been going on in the Guyana police force. And that's why the government fought Paul Slow so desperately to get what Irfan Ali called his people in the leadership of the Guyana police force, meaning Hicken, Brutus, and the others, the crime chief and the others. Every single one of these people in the top leadership in the Guyana police force, commissioner, head of admin, crime chief, the person performing the duties of deputy crime chief, every one of them have been implicated in wrongdoing, every one of them. But the PPP put them back in there, including the head of Suku. The PPP put them back in there because they know they have something hanging over their heads and they have to follow their political directives. So they round up and falsely charged the people from GCOM, all Afro-Guyanese. Then they started charging Black former ministers and MPs of the APNU AFC coalition, or parties as they are now. Then they went after Afro-Guyanese CEOs. Then they went after people who started protesting And now they've come up with this strategy of describing everybody who oppose them criminals and using the Guyana police force to criminalize them, abusing the authority of the Guyana police force under the law to criminalize their opponents. It will have serious repercussions because what will happen from now is that we will have a cycle of criminalization. Because when the PP comes out of power, the same thing will happen to them. I'm sure whichever political party or political set of political parties go back in power will do the same thing. They will arrest everybody in the PPP. And we will have a cycle of misuse of the Guyana police force, and might be justifiably so, because what goes around comes around. They're going to say, well, oh yes, the coalition government charged us. The coalition government charged them with crimes, and the courts looked at all of those charges and ordered those members of the former PPP cabinet, currently in the cabinet, to stand trial. All of them. The court looked at it, thought that they were sufficient. There was sufficient evidence to sustain those charges. So now they're charging only Afro-Guyanese with protesting whenever they protest against the government, and they're charging them with terrorism. What? Not even people who are protesting. People are even overseas, like myself. What they want to do is they're getting advice from the Republicans. That's what some Republican states do in this country, right? They brand African Guyanese civil rights leaders, political activists, community activists as terrorists or troublemakers or criminals. And they use the criminal justice system to vilify them. That's what the government is doing. For instance, they're charging people who protest with terrorism. The terrorism. You know what is going to happen? We'll have a cycle of terrorist charges in Guyana, because from the time the PP comes out of power, the new government is going to, I'm sure, charge them with terrorism. Because they think that they can smear people and kill their careers. They can't do that to me, but they have done it with Calvin Heat London. Everybody's fraud. Everybody committed fraud, or from the public service or the government service. The former ministers committed fraud. Calvin Heat London committed fraud. Trevor Bent committed fraud. You name it. Anytime you're Afro-Guyanese and the government doesn't want you in a position, they charge you with fraud. That's a fact. And they don't want us to talk about this. Then they label us racist. Well, we live in America. I live in America. We're not afraid of being labeled racist whenever we stand up for our rights. And that's what's happening in Guyana. In Guyana, African Guyanese are experiencing what we call the civil rights struggle in America during the 50s and 60s, where you have Jim Crow racists try to deprive us of our rights and our privileges as human beings, our inalienable rights, our freedoms. That's what the people are doing. They have a playbook of the KKK. They have a KKK playbook that they're going through to learn how to oppress Black people. And so they're using the security forces against the Afro-Guyanese community to bring the population under subjugation. And now they're trying to dictate to the army, and they're misusing the army. The army is only supposed to be used when the police cannot control a situation. For instance, they had a few people on the streets at Golden Grove. They brought out the army. They had a few people on the streets in Buxton. They brought out the army. Why army? Why? They want to use the opportunity to shoot and kill people, Afro-Guyanese people. And tonight, I'm going to examine the role of the GDF and the role of the police with Lieutenant Colonel Leon Saul. Before I get to that, though, before I get to the Lieutenant Colonel, I want you to take a look at what is happening now. The government is politicizing the GDF now. It's unprecedented. We've never seen it. Whenever somebody criticizes the GDF or implicates the GDF in something, the government forces the GDF to get involved in politics on their side. The government forces the GDF to take a political stand for the PPP. This is not for the government. This is for the PPP. Now, I think the leadership of the GDF is gullible. Why? Because they're falling into this trap where the PPP wants to project dominance. They want to project dominance. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about how the world views them. They want to project dominance, and they want to subject the the African Guyanese community to their control. And they're using the GDF and the police to do that. They're only bad men when the police and the GDF next to them. You catch them on an alley alone in the night and see if they're bad men, as my grandmother would say. Now, recently, WPA activists on a public platform said that people have a right to protest. I'm giving a synopsis of what he said. People have a right to protest their conditions. They live in conditions, racism, injustice. And they know that, he said he knows that the GDF and the police will be used by the government to oppress or suppress dissent, that dissent. And he said, but the GDF and the police are mainly Black people, and they must not turn their guns against their fellow Black people. The government took umbrage to that. Matter of fact, the president called it terrorism. Everything is terrorism. Everything is terrorism. But I want you to take a look at what Barrett Jagdeo, as opposition leader, said about the GDF.
Up with the military as they have done. When they come into your homes and start kicking you down, the doors down. And when they come after you, who is going to be there if the people, they're going to subvert the professionalism of the army and police, because there'll be no professional army or police if the entire executive is dominated by senior ex-policemen and ex-soldiers. There can be no professionalism as was done in the past. So, up with the military as they have done. When they come into your homes and start kicking you down, the doors down. And when they come after you, who is going to be there if the people, they're going to subvert the professionalism of the army and police, because there'll be no professional army or police if the entire executive is dominated by senior ex-policemen and ex-soldiers. There can be no professionalism as was done in the past. So, up with the military as they have done. When they come into your homes and start kicking you down, the doors down. And when they come after you, who is going to be there if the people, they're going to subvert the professionalism of the army and police, because there'll be no professional army or police if the entire executive is dominated by senior ex-policemen and ex-soldiers. There can be no professionalism as was done in the past. So,
you heard him. He is describing the army and other security forces as criminals that kick down the doors of his Indian supporters in Albion. He's not saying this in Nance Grove. He's not saying this in Golden Grove or in the Backlist or Den Amstel or Poudroin or Parika or Stroudville or Iflat. He's not saying it at Weldad or number 28 or Litchfield or Hopetown or Belladrum or Manchester, Liverpool, Lancaster, Alnez. No, he is saying this in Albion. He's saying this to his Indian supporters. You have to be scared of them Black people in the GDF because they're kicked down the door bandits. Well, I want to know if the current GDF chief of staff, to whom I got respect, or anybody in the leadership of the GDF will condemn that. I think that is far worse than saying Black people in the GDF shouldn't turn their guns against Black citizens. And let me say this. I believe an army should be a professional army. I'm a public policy person. I've worked in public policy since I'm a teenager. I believe the police, security service, army should be professionals, should be apolitical, should follow the law. However, follow the law means follow the law. Follow the law also means ensuring that the law is enforced and the rule of law is adhered to. You would recall during the Arab Spring, many armies in those Arab countries that experienced the Arab Spring stopped the government and police services from shooting people who demonstrated their constitutional right to protest. It was the army that did that. The army stopped the government from abusing the people. The army didn't commit any crimes. The army ensured that the law was upheld. So the PPP can't have it both ways, or no government can have it both ways. And like we've said, the army is supposed to be used under extreme circumstances in a civilian role. Why? Because I've worked for the president of Guyana as a special assistant. So I understand from a public policy perspective, the army is not trained to do civilian work, civilian law enforcement work. There is a law enforcement arm, the military police, but they're not trained, because police officers are welfare officers, they're probation officers, they're therapists, they're social workers, they're domestic violence counselors, they're negotiators. Police officers are all-rounders in this society. Army officers are just supposed to be there to protect and defend. They know how to shoot. That's it. That's what they train them for. But I'm not the expert. The expert is the Lieutenant Colonel. Let me bring him. Welcome, former Lieutenant Colonel of the Guyana Defense Force, Mr. Leon Saul. Good night, sir.
Good night, Rickford. Good night to your listeners.
Thanks for joining me. Did I make any sense just now?
Yes, basically, the military is trained to defend our country against external aggression, and the police is trained to fight crime and maintain public order. But I just want to make some quick point in relation to the police. Sure. And in a democracy, one element that defines a police, an effective police force in a democracy, there are three elements that I want to address. It's the subject of rule of law, embodying values respectful of human dignity rather than the wishes of a powerful leader or a party. Two, they can intervene in the life of citizens only under limited and careful controlled circumstances and is publicly accountable. And so when you look at those elements, let us see how the Guyana Police Force measure up to those elements in terms of the subject to rule of law, embodying values respectful of human dignity rather than the wishes of powerful leader or party. I believe that the police force is an instrument of oppression. And when one look, for example, at some of the charges that were laid against citizens over the past 2.5 years, you wonder what is going on. For example, the East Coasters that were charged for terrorism. That is not terrorism. And one can only conclude that the police acted on the instruction of their political boss or bosses. And I am convinced that is what happened. It should not happen. We live in a democratic state, and the whole question of rule of law and separation of power arise, because obviously the political directorate should not give the police instruction to charge X or Y. It is the police who must make that decision, and if they're incapable on the advice of the Director of Public Prosecution. Additionally, when a crime is committed, we have to look at the charge and ensure that the charge that is being brought against a person is the correct charge. I think in the case of the East Coast, that was simply public dishonesty, or it was not terrorism. For you to charge someone with terrorism, there must be a political goal, there must be some degree of violence, and you have to get that organization, that political organization, and so
An
on.
ideology, use violence to achieve an
Yes,
ideology, execute an
yeah,
ideology. Yes.
you're correct. And even when the police intervene in the life of citizens, only under limited and careful controlled circumstances. We have seen the police use, they're very brutal at times when dealing with certain section of the population. And under other condition, they're not. We can recall what happened on March the 6th, 2020, right? And then we see, for example, I think it was around August the 6th this year at Moko Arcadia, how the police operated, you know. And lastly, I'm convinced that our police is not accountable to the public. And this is so because they're encouraged by the government to disrespect a certain section of the society. And we need, as citizens, we have to fight against these things. We need public institutions that are accountable to the people and not necessary to a political party or a leader. And that is what we need to deal with. In relation to the military, I believe that when dealing with the military, we know, for example, the Guyana Defense Force was established under the Defense Act, Chapter 1501, and it clearly specifies how the force should operate and so on. We know that the president is the commander in chief of the defense force, and that is clear, that is understood. And also, we have a defense board. But like anything else, there are two types of potential danger when you look at the military and the politician. One, we have to guard against from the politician who have military ambition and also from the military with political ambition. You know, there are many times we only think about the military with political ambition because we want to guard against coup d'etat and so on. I think that is undesirable because we know what would have happened. We know military government can be very brutal, and no one wants to see a military government. However, there are certain principles that should guide that relationship between the military and government. And the first one is the existence of a clear legal and constitutional framework defining the basic relationship between the state and the armed forces. And when I speak of the state, basically that include of the people, the government, and the territorial land itself. You must get that constitutional framework that define that. Fair enough, we have our Defense Act. The next one, there must be a significant role of Parliament in legislating on defense and security matters, in influence the formulation of a national strategy in contributing to transparency decision concerning defense and security policy, in giving budget approval and control, in spending using the power of the purse, in issue relating to the power of the sword. I mean here, arms and so on. I am not certain what role Parliament play, or if there is even a national defense strategy. I don't know if we have one, and what is that national defense strategy. Perhaps we will need to find out if there's a national defense strategy. As far as I am aware, there is none. And they need to work on something like that. And they need to get the parliament more involved. There need to be that oversight. Because that oversight, parliamentary oversight, will somewhat lessen that tendency of government to politicize the army, because I believe that they're going at a point now where the army is being politicized. I remember when I joined the army in 1987, it was a truly professional place until around 2002, when we witnessed the jailbreak. There was a lot of distrust between the political directorates, and that relationship breakdown between the military leadership and the government. And subsequently, I think it was in 2008 or 2009, at the time of the retirement of Brigadier General Collins, there was several officers were superseded. I personally believe at that point, the morale of the army went under. And I don't think they ever recover from that.
Let me stick a point, a question in there. There's no question that the army has been politicized by the PPP. Every time they come into power, they politicize the army because they want control. Do you think that because we're not a very litigious society, we don't go to court, or we believe that even the courts are co-opted into the agenda of the PPP, and the courts in some way help them to execute their political agenda? Do you think it was a mistake when those officers were superseded not to challenge that flagrant violation of their profession in court? Because I'm not sure if I can say regulation, but the convention is that the person who's most senior always moves to the top. And when you're going to bring a junior rank and supersede 4 people, that's a violation of the convention and professional standards of operation. So that, to me, the court should be able to adjudicate on. Do you think that was a mistake that wasn't done?
I am not certain. I think they take into consideration the Defense Act, because obviously the Defense Act would have allowed the political directorate to do such. In keeping with convention, it was not in keeping with what was practiced. But as I said, the political directorate, they were covered under the Defense Act. And maybe the officers did take that into consideration, and they did not want to fight the system.
But there's something called legal precedent. So regardless of what the Defense Act says, if you feel wronged, the courts are there for you to go and seek relief. And maybe they would have gotten a ruling that then established case law. So we have the same situation now with Paul Williams, where the government just seconded him. I'm not sure that is legal. Removed him from within the force and put him somewhere else, and brought a very junior rank to him. He's a substantive deputy police commissioner, and made him commissioner of police, acting when there were several other officers who were senior to him. It's the same thing, and I'm wondering why we allow this to happen. Every time the PPP is in power, they completely got the professional ethics, standard operating process, the law, everything. It's just obliterated for them to achieve their political objectives.
In the case of Paul Williams, I think if we are to look at Paul's case, we can make reference to Paul Slow, because Paul Slow, I think, was seconded and he refused.
Exactly.
And he was vindicated.
By the courts.
By the courts.
Yes.
So, but maybe Paul decided, I don't want to fight the system. It's okay. Let me just go my way. Because I want to believe if you remain in the system, it will become very difficult for you. And so people do not want to confront the government. You know, we are a very small society and people can be very vindictive and so on. But nevertheless,
But bear in mind, the police commissioner is a constitutional position. Constitutional. And you know what, it bothers me because I've lived more years outside of Guyana than I've lived inside of Guyana. And I cannot ever accept the subjugation of people, the rulership that the PP always try to impose whenever they're in power. I could never accept that. Along with other things, other characteristics of the PPP and their members. But you often hear in the American society, people say, well, I'm doing this for the institution. I'm doing this to make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm doing this to ensure that we comply with the rule of law. What do you think is absent within the Guyanese culture that people are not this conscious?
I think the citizens generally do not understand their responsibility as a citizen, or they do not understand what it meant to be a citizen. And so generally people just accept anything. And this fear for the politicians and those in power. In the case of the police force or the army, I think, or generally in the public service, we, the citizen, must stand up and demand the government be accountable to the people. And we ourselves have to ensure that when we execute our duties in these organizations, that we do it in a responsible manner, in keeping with the constitution of this country and the things that are expected of us. We know the roles that we ought to play, and therefore we should execute our tasks without fear or favor, affection, or ill will.
I agree with you. Now, coming back to the military, that's your expertise. You're a commissioned officer, retired at a very high rank, a lieutenant colonel. The leadership, I interact a lot with both former and current officers. For a couple of years, we brought officers of the Guyana Defense Force here. And the consensus among my organization, the Guyana Independence Committee, elected officials here, community leaders here who interact with these guys, they're very well trained and they're very intelligent. They're bright young men and women. I happen to think that their skill set is not well managed by keeping them in the GDF. I think they should be rotated out in the public service and be permanent secretaries and planning officers and development officers and project managers. These guys are highly skilled. And I'm wondering if we're making good use of our human resource capital, when we send all of these officers to train in London and the War College and all of this, are we just bring them back in the GDF and they drive home and drive back to work every day? They drill, they go to some conferences, they travel sometime, they do continuing education and continuing training, and that's it. The country is never able to benefit from that skill, their intelligence, their brilliance, until after they retire. Some of them go into public service, or some of them go into business, or some of them just enjoy their retirement. Do you think the country makes good use of the skilled men and women in the military?
I should think that for those who are in the military, especially in the technical areas, yes. For the other officers who perhaps are highly qualified and trained, and they have skills that are not necessarily of value to the military, I strongly believe that they should be seconded to the public service where they can give leadership. Because many of the officers, as you said, they're highly trained, and so they will go back into the military and they're just there and their skills are underutilized. And I think they can do well with them in the public service. But mind you, if you put them in the public service, they're going to displace other persons, right? So I don't know if that is a consideration.
Well, I'm pretty sure if we were to go through the public service, we'll see hundreds of vacancies at all levels. And so I don't think there's to me it should be something like national service where you rotate them in and you rotate them out. You're also building their skill sets in the army, because when they come out in the public service, they gain more experience, which they can then apply to the military in whatever capacity that's relevant. But in terms of the senior leadership of the military, how you think the senior leadership, if the chief of staff or the second in command or the quartermaster or the colonel, sorry, the colonel, the general colonel or whatever it's called, were to call you as a former experienced military officer, the general officer, adjunct general is the word I'm looking for, were to call you to get advice in terms of the politicization of the military, how do they respond to unlawful political directives or unethical political directives? What would be your advice? How would you advise the military to maintain its professionalism and its apolitical posture?
Firstly, Rickford, they need to look keenly at the Defense Act. Secondly, what is important, they must know what is the national defense strategy, and that should guide them along with the policy. And, these documents should offer some guidance. And once they recognize what is going on is not in the best interest of the military, it's actually leading to the politicization of the military. In no uncertain term, they should let the commander-in-chief know this is not in the best interest of the military. What you're telling me to do, I believe it is illegal. It will actually, it is leading to the politicization of the military. And we need a military that is apolitical, a military that the citizen or the average citizen has confidence in. They must have the will to tell the commander-in-chief that. And you cannot be afraid. And if they want to continue, you should just resign your commission. I think that is the best approach,
I'm seeing I'm seeing some comments here. By the way, we have a member of the United States Congress looking at us, looking at the program. Welcome. But I'm getting a comment from a major in the United States Army, a Guyanese major stationed in Virginia, and he's saying the politicization of the military affects its readiness and also its ability to recruit members, because the military has to continuously recruit people so it can maintain a certain level of readiness for combat or to execute the mission, which is the national defense of the country. And he's saying that thanks very much.
I agree with him.
Go ahead, comment on what he said.
Yes, Rickford, he's correct. He's correct, because if the military is politicized, obviously, people would not want to join the military, and those professional officers will leave. And therefore, the military would not be equipped for its mission. All right. And that is why I state clearly, we must understand our role in keeping with the Defense Act. There ought to be some national defense strategy, and there ought to be some policy document on defense. So you basically look at all of those things and you develop your work plan and so on. And so coming out of those things, you will know what are your likely tasks, what you ought to do, right? And as a professional military officer, you should recognize the things that are leading to the politicization of the military, and you should avoid them or so advise the political directorate. What you're telling me to do is not in the best interest of the military. I want you to bear certain thing in mind. So I know and of cases where over the past 2 or 3 years or so, we have seen again ranks being superseded, junior people being promoted, and so on. All of that contributes to the low morale in the force. And if you have a force with low morale, they cannot effectively execute their tasks. And we see that in the Russian
War with
Ukraine
Ukraine,
conflict.
right?
Yes, because the Ukraine military, their morale is very, very high. And that is what keep them going, and they have good leadership.
Two
And we
questions,
have to be very careful.
two follow-up questions. To be more direct, like I said, I have the utmost respect for GDF. I like the guys in the GDF. I like their professionalisms, at least some of them. I know some of them. I've spoken with some of them. I've even spoken with some people who were shocked that I would be so cordial. But that's me. I'm a professional. Um, do you think that the comments that Colonel Best, obviously, sorry, Brigadier Best, obviously was probably directed to me in response to Kome Ogunsi. Do you think he should have gotten involved in that political um, exchange there in defense to me of the government, of the
I
ruling party?
don't think he should have gotten involved because of what is obtained in Guyana. One must understand what caused Takuma to make that statement. We must understand that. And we should try to fix that caused Takuma to make that statement. The fact is that Black people are being discriminated against. The fact is that Black people are being treated as second-class citizens, right? So I don't see anything wrong with what Takuma said, and therefore I do not support Brigadier Best in that statement that he would have made, because they should, and even the people in the security sector in general, those who do intelligence, they should understand what is going on in this country. And that should have come as no surprise to them. You cannot want to oppress people and expect them to remain quiet all the time. People will fight back. And you must expect that if you live in a country where people are trampling on people's rights.
Do you think that the fact that he made that statement in of itself politicized the GDF further?
I really don't think so. You must
Okay.
understand that the brigadier was coerced to make that statement. He was directed to make that statement. He had to make the statement. If he wants the job, he has to make the statement.
And you know what? That is my point. And for the people in the GDF watching, I'm not beating up on the brigadier. I am trying to highlight a cancer within the Guyanese society where the government thinks that they can press every button and direct everything and tell people things to do. I'm pretty sure the brigadier. I'm not. I'm pretty sure. I know the brigadier is a professional officer, and he would execute the mandates or the directives of the commander in chief. Um, and nobody wants anybody in the military to be insubordinate. But we have to understand the political climate we're operating. Before we come back to the police force and close off, I want to ask this question. Do you think that with the current state of politicization of the force, the demoralization of officers because of how they're treated, some of them, their pays are not raised, some of them are superseded. Do you think Guyana is at a readiness, given that we have a territorial issue? I wouldn't call it a dispute, it's just a Venezuela making a stupid claim on another country. Forgetting that we will have to get international help. Do you think that the current state of affairs of the GDF makes them prepared to face the challenge of Venezuela?
Now, we must understand two very important things in the military. Leadership and morale is very, very important if we are thinking about any conflict with neighboring country, and of course we will need help. And given the fact there seems to be a problem with the leadership and the morale, I will say we are not prepared. Right? We are not prepared. Um, in terms of the organization of the security forces in Ghana, I don't know what influence the level of organization that they have. I'm speaking here how the army is organized in terms of units. Perhaps it's the intelligence that they have and so on. But I'm not even certain about that because when one looks at where emphasis is being placed, you must ask yourself if we are serious. Our western border is very porous, and to me, I don't see much emphasis is placed on the security of the western border. You know,
And
um,
tell our listeners, where is the western border?
I'm speaking about the Guyana Venezuela border, right? I think more emphasis should be placed there. And in terms of surveillance, we need to improve the surveillance along the western border. While there are a lot of non-state actors along that border coming across, apart from the threat that we have with Venezuela. And I don't see that emphasis there, but rather I see the army being engaged in assisting the police in maintenance of public order, and they're doing more arts and mind. They're getting involved in men on mission, and so on. Right? Instead of being mission on the border, they're on men on mission. So I guess it's the advice maybe come from the national security advisor. Sometimes we talk about security and people don't understand what is security as I speak about security, because if they do understand what is security, they will know that they should not treat a large proportion of citizens in a disrespectful manner. They would know that if you don't find jobs for them, it's a security problem. If you disrespect them, it will be a security problem. And they should know that. But perhaps for them, security is about guns and bullets and private
I
security.
was going to ask you, do you think that this government has the intellectual depth to analyze security in its full international context?
I don't think so. From what I'm seeing, I know we are organized for defense and even internal security. I don't think so. Right? They do not understand security in that context. Security, perhaps for them, we gotta keep them black people in check, you know. Right?
Um, Before I want to come back to that same question, but before I want to pivot back to the Guyana Police Force, have you ever seen in your military career, in your travels abroad, in your training? I'm pretty sure you were trained substantively abroad. A civilian paramilitary organization frame citizens like this, just completely frame citizens, and the police force cannot say they don't do that because we see they try to frame Quindon Bacchus, they try to frame or in Boston. They try to frame Kevin Andrews. They're currently trying to frame me, even though I'm out of the country and out of their jurisdiction. And they could probably and are probably going to be sanctioned for it. How have you ever seen that? And how does
Not in a democratic society. Not in a
right in a
democratic
democratic right? So how as a military person, how do you advise the population to deal with a military that a police force that is out of control, that is behaving like Russia or North Korea? They're making the state into a police state as a result of political directives. How do you advise the population to deal with that, especially given the context that while the government is politicizing the country, police making the country a police state, they're destroying democratic institutions or weakening democratic institutions like the parliament, like the court. So there's no real accountability.
For every case where we believe that the police is being excessive or the person is um, inappropriately charged. I personally believe that we should fight back with overwhelming force, whether we take to the street and protest or use the judicial system and so on. We cannot accept these things. And, you know, for example, the East Coast 12, that the people are charged for terrorism, and we just accept it.
Right.
In large numbers, we should have taken to the streets. We must do it.
And when you say force, you mean human force. You mean political
that's what
action.
I mean. Political
Because you know they're
action.
going to go and say you violate some cybercrime act and you charge
What
with
is
terrorism and all of that.
it? You have a right to protest,
Right. But
right?
in Guyana's context, you're a terrorist. So people who have jobs or professionals, they don't want to risk being criminalized as a terrorist. And then the government put out this wanted bulletin that can have international implications for their travel and all that. This is how evil. And I don't even want to. I don't even want to say the word, but this is how devious the government is. They want everybody in the opposition who speaks up to be branded terrorists internationally.
If we don't fight back and we just accept these things, it will get more pervasive and it will be everywhere. And therefore, we have to send a strong message that we are tired. We will not allow you to abuse us any longer. We're tired of it.
I was speaking to a government official, my penultimate question, who says there's no racism. Black people are very happy in Guyana, and that's why there's no mass protests or no mass action against the government, because Black people are very contented. They have never been happy and given so much opportunities before in their life. Is that so? You're on the ground. I noticed I tickled you there.
Of course, because you know, people are so much afraid that they don't want to go out there because they will lose their job. Even if they work in some of these private sector entity will dismiss them. And so that is the fear in the society, and that is why people don't necessarily go there. And perhaps too, we need to look at our leadership and organize people. We need to give them that confidence. Hey, you come out, I'm going to take care of you. And so we ourselves, we have to look inward at the leadership that we are offering. If people don't have confidence in us, they will not come. So we need to recharge. We must recharge. Because once people have confidence in the leadership, they will come out because they know that you can bring about that change for them.
I want to come back to, and you pivoted to it almost. I want to come back to the state of the Black population in Guyana, subjugated, oppressed, depressed, trampled upon, marginalized, victimized, subjugated. How do we reinvigorate the Black community? How do we go into all the Black communities and teach our Black youth how to become productive citizens? How to beat the stigma of being criminalized as terrorists and so on? How to educate the ones who are not formally educated, but have a tendency to hang out and they have vocational kind of jobs and they do things with their hands, but they have no formal training. How do we do that? How do we talk to our contractors who are frustrated that they're not getting contracts? How do we get them to form conglomerates and pool their resources and form one big company? And if they can't qualify for a contract, this one might have, let's say, a road contract. Mr. Tom will have excavators. This person would be an engineer. That person would have workers. This person would be able to have access stone and cement. This one has the business acumen to write the proposal. How do we bring our people together? How do we empower the Black community to become competitive and to force the government to empower them and to bring them along on the path to economic development and to stop this strategy of shutting out the Black population from economic survival. How do we do that?
Rickford, firstly, we need to build a cadre of leaders, and we fan out across the communities. We identify the problem and organize. I think simple as that, we can do it. We have to identify the resources. Where we have resources, what can we do? And once we're able to do that, I think we can address this issue that is confronting us today.
One of the things that I suggested to a young man from Buxton the other day, it's something I learned from a 21-year-old. A few years ago in New York, his friend was shot. And we all of us community leaders went to the family. He was Guyanese and Antiguan. And he was a very popular kid. He was shot and killed on his step. And when I got out there were like 300 young men outside of this house, all silent in shock that this young man was killed. And there was one particular young man who's Jamaican, he's from St. Vincent. And he said to me, you see all of us here? You all gotta find something for us to do because all of us will die eventually. So one of the mayor's staff was there, so I called him over. I'm like, do you have a proposal? And he said something to us that was most fascinating. He said, you guys always tell us that we want training, but you want to carry us somewhere. We got to travel and go somewhere, and we got to get training. And how about if you bring the training to the community? I could get all these young men to come to the training. I said, how are we going to do it? He said, y'all just find a place. The same courses y'all going to take us to the university or the technical college to do, bring those colleges here. And what we did were engage all of the churches in the area, because churches are community spaces. People congregate, assembly spaces. And we got with the colleges, and we got one college to do plumbing, the next college to do electrical engineering or electrical technician training, next one to do painting and so on. And before you know it, there was a college. There was a college, like a college campus in the community. And those young men were able to go through 6 months of training. They got a certificate. Some of them dropped out. But in the end, we were able to train like 50 young men in vocational skills. And then we wrote like the mass transit, and we wrote contractors and so on. And some of them became employed. Those are the innovative things we need to do for economically depressed communities. And I'm wondering if we cannot come up with some sort of think tank to help empower the Afro-Guyanese population and not wait on this East Indian-led government that is more interested in subjugating the Black population than uplifting it, empowering it, and making them economically viable citizens.
I think we can work on something like that. I know, for example, myself and Lincoln Lewis, recently we have actually find employment for several persons, and we were able to place them. And these are vulnerable persons, young men. And so we continue to do that and see how we can find jobs for people and place them in companies and so on. Although these jobs are temporary jobs, maybe like a year or two, depends on the life cycle of the project. But
maybe you can also, your institute, I know you just launched an institute, the institute, tell us about it and tell us about the work you're doing.
Okay, the Institute for Action Against Discrimination, basically we are working to eliminate discrimination in Guyana. What we are doing right now, we are documenting all the cases, and we are looking for a kind of lawyers too, because we want to take some of these cases to court. We want lawyers who will work pro bono, and we hope to continue to collaborate with you and other organizations so we can fight against this evil regime that we have here that is bent on discriminating against persons in Guyana, not only people of African descent, but Guyanese in general. There are many cases.
Great, thank you. And tell people where you can be reached if they want to come to you to discuss discrimination against them.
I can be reached at Quitstowe Labor College from Monday to Friday between 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock.
Great,
I'm
thank
right
you.
here, so they can reach me there. And in 2 weeks' time, we will be in Golden Grove. We will do an outreach in Golden Grove on the east coast of Demerara. We're in the process of planning for that so we can educate people what to do in terms of the discrimination. We really want to take the fight against discrimination, as I said, in every street, in every village, in every district, the entire country. We have to root out discrimination. Thank you.
And I hope too that you'll engage the diplomatic community, because it's important for us to telegraph these things and communicate them to the international community.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Everybody, those of you who have a passion for civil rights and civil liberties and for ensuring that people's rights are respected, join the work of the Institute for Action Against Discrimination. Former Lieutenant Colonel Leon Saul, thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Thank you. Not former. I have Lieutenant.
Yes, sorry. Retired.
Lieutenant Colonel
retired.
Right.
Once a colonel, always a colonel, right?
I am retired, but not my rank.
I know. Thank you. Thanks for the correction. That's because of my ignorance on things military. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you for joining me.
Good night, everybody.
And I'll see you again this weekend from Atlanta, Georgia, where we'll be having a conference and we'll have a town hall meeting in the Guyanese community to discuss these very issues. Have a good night, everybody. See you again.